All right, mini book clubs, mini lesson. Let's go. Alrighty, friends. So let me go ahead once again and move my video over so it doesn't block the text. All right, let's do our mini lesson. Okay, so a few things to know about book clubs before you really get started. Ultimately, the whole idea of book clubs is that they are based on student choice. They can really be done outside of the wheelhouse of English language arts. When it comes to actual book clubs, I can totally see how people might be a little hesitant and say, no, that's just a language arts thing. But because we're going to be doing many book clubs and not actually using full novels or full books, we're going to be using like short texts. That opens up the possibilities of doing these with many other subjects and themes. So you could do them on real world math applications, STEM applications. You could do them introducing a unit to the Holocaust. You could do them with a unit on poetry. There's so many possibilities. The process does involve some formal writing. Informal writing, as well as a lot of social interaction among group members. A lot of that social interaction is going to be informal as well, but because I do recommend setting some expectations for group interactions, they are going to be really good practice for appropriate like discussion, active listening, and ultimately being authentic and peer-led. The teacher's role when you're doing many book clubs is much more as a facilitator. The work for the teacher is kind of all up front, where you gather the materials and then you roll them out to the students. And then after that, the students are really going to be the ones doing all of the work. And you just kind of sit back and facilitate, ask questions, not answer, ask questions. And we'll kind of look at that. So what are mini book clubs and how do they work? So let's look at the basics, part 1 and part 2. I'm going to kind of take us through the process here with the basics. If there's something that doesn't quite make sense, hang tight, because I'll actually go through some examples that I've done in class so you can see what each step of this process looks like. So the very first step of doing mini book clubs is you want to decide on your subject or your theme or your topic. And then you'll need to go out and gather a selection of short stories or short texts or articles, different reading materials for students to choose from. So I list a couple of options that you have here. You can even do them with longer texts like graphic novels, books in verse, nonfiction, short texts, even children's books. And at first, I was kind of turned off by this idea because I thought, oh my gosh, like how am I going to have time to do this? Where am I going to be able to gather a selection from? But I have a lot of suggestions for you guys, and 2 websites and a book suggestion right off the bat that are going to help you with that part. So after you make your after you gather all your selections, a lot of times I like to choose online options like articles, or I scan short stories and upload them online because I like to create a menu for the kids. The kids will ultimately look over the titles of the short text that you chose, and I like to hyperlink those titles, and then when they click on them, they'll take them directly to that text. So everything is sort of in a hub there in that menu. The menu usually has the title of the work. I might include like some random picture that's related, and then a blurb so that they kind of know what they're choosing, right? I don't want to give them like a synopsis because these are short works. So I'll show you an example of what those menus look like and what I include on them. From those menus, the students are going to select what they want to read, and then ultimately they're going to read it individually first. I have the students read their works individually instead of getting into their groups because I find that once they're in their groups, they get very easily distracted and have a hard time focusing on reading. So have them read whatever they're reading first. They can annotate online. They can annotate on paper if you have it printed out, or they can just jot notes on a sticky note or in their journal. Ultimately, while the kids are reading, I have them jot down things that they notice or things that stood out to them or things they found that were interesting, or even write down any questions. If you want a little bit more out of mini book clubs, you can also conduct a mini lesson. Obviously, you'll need to do a mini lesson that introduces, the process of mini book clubs, but In English, for example, I might do a mini lesson over figurative language in poetry. And then the students would go off and read their individual poems or read their poems individually and make any noticings where they see that figurative language that I talked about, and then get together in their group to talk about that. The same could happen for if you were doing something on plate tectonics and you had different articles. You could talk about like a little bit about the intro to the history of plate tectonics or something like that to kind of prime their brains. Ultimately, students are going to be grouped by their choice. I usually do groups of 3 to 5 students typically. And I don't mind if students get in groups with their friends, although sometimes I might encourage them to go to another group. But they're grouped by what they chose, not by a group that I chose for them. And then students will get together with that group. And the first thing they do is they just sit and they talk. They share out their noticings, what they found that was interesting. And I encourage everybody to come with at least one question, because those are what's going to drive the discussion. We even talk about, like what makes a good question. If you want to take it a step further, instead of just having the kids talk about it, you can also have them do an activity or a product to kind of showcase their learning. What's cool about doing your product is that you can do a gallery walk so that all the students that read different articles or different short stories, they can kind of get an idea of what the other students read, which is pretty awesome. And I'll show you some examples of those products as well. So before I show you guys these like actual examples, I have a couple of things that I highly, highly recommend for you. I need to move my video back over real quick. There we go. Okay, so a few things I recommend. When the students are making their choices, I recommend having them choose their top 3 things, because sometimes a group will fill up, or sometimes an article isn't popular and you have to like discontinue a group, and they'll need to go their second choice. I have the students tell me what their first, second, and third choices are by completing a Google form. But I also have just done it in the past by having them write down their choices on an index card, like on their way out of class, and then I form their groups like that. When the group's first to get together, I recommend having them record down, maybe on a sheet for you to turn in, 5 group expectations that they have for like group behaviors. What do they expect? What is their listening going to look like? What do they want group members to say or contribute to? How are they going to help each other out? After they do that expectation setting, I also recommend doing a few, just maybe 2 or 3 fun questions before you actually have them start their discussion about their short text. If it's like a really short text and they're just meeting briefly for like one class period, you don't absolutely have to do the expectations as a group or do the fun questions. But if you really want authentic discussion, you kind of need to help them break the ice a little bit. So you could ask them, if you can have any superpower you want, why? Start with the person with the shortest hair. Or you could ask them, what is something you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were younger? Person that's closest to the ceiling, standing, goes first. Make sure to also give kids enough time to actually read in class. So sometimes that looks like you reading on the first day, and then the second day actually getting together in groups. Yes, this is going to be a little clunky at first, but I promise it gets easier and more fun as you figure it out. So let's look at an actual example I did with a poetry unit. Don't worry, if you came here for science, math, social studies, art, I have some recommendations for you guys as well. So it's not just ELA focused. So an example for a poetry unit, students had been learning about the elements of poetry. We had done a few poems together. Ultimately, it was time for them to do a poem on their own and show me what they knew. And I didn't want to just give them a poem to read silently and then, fill out a worksheet about. I wanted to have that student interaction and discussion because, poetry is an art form, right? And I felt like we could get so much more depth out of that, out of a discussion and group mind. So here's what everything looked like. I let students choose their own poem. And here was our steps. So the first thing I did, so I'm going to walk you guys through my process here. The first thing I did was, okay, I need to collect some poems. Our theme, our unit we had been going through wasn't just poetry, it was also empathy. So I gathered empathy poems from all over the place. Some of them came from a book I had. Some of them came from a collection of poems I had. Let me show you guys the menu that I made. So here's the menu that the students accessed on their Google Classroom. I just made this using a table in Google Docs, and I said choose one poem below to read, click on the poem's name to read that poem. So I actually hyperlinked the poems here as well. I tried to include a wide range of poems here. So the way I did this, I don't want them to just choose from the title. I want them to actually feel like they have a little bit of choice here. It's not random. So in the middle column, you'll notice I have a little blurb of what that poem is about. So we have, this one has a video link because it is a spoken poem, but I also included the hyperlink to like the actual typed up poem as well. Some of them were easier, some of them were tougher. For some of my students that were having a hard time choosing, here you can see I scanned a page from one of my books and I just uploaded it to Google Drive and I hyperlinked it here. So I would recommend this one because it was a little bit lower level, but the interest was really high with this one. So they would choose their poem and read that on their own and annotate using Notability on their iPad. After they did that, after they used this menu, let me go back here, and they read their own poem, they got together in their groups to discuss. Again, I had them bring a question and their own thoughts. I could have stopped there, but I wanted to see how they were doing with some of their own interpretation and understanding of poetry. So while they sat with their groups, I had each student fill out their own mini one-pager. I usually do a full page, but this was a shorter mini book club because it was just a poem. So I created this template on Canva. You could also just do it by hand if you want to, or you could just draw it on Google Docs or slides. And I just made some boxes and they kind of look different, but it's the same questions, cut them in half. And the kids actually did these on paper, but they could do the digital version if they wanted to. So in your own words, what is this poem about? So most of my kids would naturally were having those discussions in their group as they were filling this out. Here's where they show me two poetic devices. You'll notice that there's a lot of freedom here. They chose their poem. They're doing things in their own words. They can express themselves kind of in their own way. And so ultimately that was the product that they turned in. But I also listened in on their discussions because that told me a lot about how the students were understanding stuff. So these slides are available for you guys underneath this video if you want to click on these. These are all clickable links. Another example, if you want to check it out, is the short horror stories example. I had a lot of fun with a website called Genially. Right down here, it's kind of funky the way the link looks, to make their menu. So I gathered all of these short horror stories and poems. I had a whole bunch of short horror story books. I checked some out from the library, and I scanned some pages just so that they could access that. So if you click on the link, it would take them to the short story of The Hitchhiker here. Or if they chose Soul Survivor, it'll take you to the scan that I did and I uploaded to Google Classroom. But again, you'll notice that they have a short blurb that will gives them an idea of what they wanted. Here, I actually had the kids read the blurb one day, give me their top 3 choices at the end of class. And then the next day I told them, which story they got. They read their story. And then I told them what book club they were in. And I always guarantee that the kids are going to get their first, second, or third choice. And then, as a product for that one, I had them do a full one-pager that looked like this. And again, I just made this on Canva. They had a border, short summary, mood, a picture, something that happened, title, symbol that represents it. We were doing different levels of questioning. Give it a star rating. They love that one. We were talking about indirect characterization. So we were able to get a lot of stuff in there. And that was a little bit of a harder page to fill out. And so I was really thankful they had their book clubs to help them. So what about other subjects? Or if you want to do nonfiction, or if you want to do articles, I highly recommend using the website Common Lit. Holy moly, it's amazing. You can find articles for anything, but they also have these amazing text collections. So I'm just clicking on that link right there. And in their text collections, they do have typical ELA stuff, but as you go down, you'll notice they have text collections for like the Civil War, for example. So if you were learning about the Civil War and you want to do a mini book club, oh my goodness, all of these are different texts about all different things that happened during the Civil War. Cool way to either have students expand on their knowledge of the Civil War after you've introduced it, or even to introduce that time period. And so there's some other links, just some examples of text collections that you can find on Common Lit. Newsella is also pretty cool, especially for like science articles or current events. Highly recommend Newsella, sort of like Common Lit as well. I get a lot of my stuff just from short story and anthology books, and I scan them, upload them to Google Drive, and make them clickable. Or I find short stories online that are available, that are not, under copyright. Let's see, poetry collections. You can do books in verse. Students probably actually need a book though for that one. Same with graphic novels. You can have students do short books from the library. All you would need is 2 copies for like a group of 3, and then they can kind of like trade around if they need to over time, over a couple days. You can even do this with YouTube videos, with like spoken poetry, with movie creation, with styles of art, all kinds of different stuff. If you're an ELA, I highly recommend you check out the Quick Right Hand book by Linda Reef. There's some amazing things in there that you can use, as well as online magazines, online news sources, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so really fast towards the end, because I'm going a little bit over my mini lesson cutoff time here. So don't underestimate the power of just stopping with the discussion for these, because that's already taking it up a notch. But if you want to do some products, I have some recommendations for you. Give me 1 second to click ahead. Okay. So I do have some recommendations for you. If you want to do a 1-pager or an infographic, I have the link there for that. You can go to canva.com to create those, or create them by hand or in Google. You could also do a placemat consensus. This is more of just a guided discussion, but it's written down so you can collect them to see them. So I would put this in the middle of their table, and you would ask the students a question of, if you had to summarize this article in your own words in 2 sentences, what would you do? And the kids all write on their own, and then they come to a consensus together after they do individual writing. You could ask about character. You could ask about their opinion on something. All kinds of different stuff. So that's placemat consensus. I just made that template on Canvas. Feel free to use that as well. And I print that out and put it in the middle of their table. And sometimes I have to add a spot for like a 5th student on the side. I love written conversations. Written conversations are for pairs of students. So if you have students reading the same thing in pairs, or even different things in pairs, after they read, take notes. Instead of having an out loud discussion, each student starts with a sheet of notebook paper. And the student starts by basically writing a letter to their partner, even if they don't know them, telling them about what they found interesting in their short story, poem, or article, what they thought it was about, and what stood out to them. And I usually let them write for maybe like 3 or 4 minutes just to get a hello there. And then they without even talking, they swap papers, and then they like respond. So they start by writing simultaneously to each other, and then they swap papers and respond to each other. And then they swap again and respond to each other. So that's a written conversation. Again, that's something that you can pick up to see, actually see that conversation. The kids really get into that. They start having fun. If they have really cool quotes, or they find something really important, you can have them do a quote graffiti wall where they write that down. Another one they can do, if you're doing ELA, I'm going to click on this bottom one, character wheel. Again, made this on Canva. I would have each group member pick like 2 of these different, if you did a short story, something with like a plot with characters. I would have each student kind of like pick one of the sections of the wheel to work on. I give them their own copies. They cut them out and they glue them down. And then they go around and they kind of like share that out with each other. And then they can do a gallery walk of different characters. It's pretty cool. And then my personal all-time favorite is the forced analogy activity. This came from an Abydos training, or Abydos, I'm not sure how to say it, that I did on writing, and it is higher level thinking at its finest. So the way I've done this before, the idea is you have the students read their stuff, and then you provide them with a collection of actual physical objects, like random photos that I printed from online, like super random. I got them on Teachers Pay Teachers. They're like food for thought photos. I lay out a bunch of the photos, and then as a group, the group will go over and pick a photo that represents a character in their story, or a photo that represents what they think the mood of this story is. Or they pick a photo, let's say they're doing a Civil War article. They pick a photo that they feel like represents the article, and then they have to justify that. They talk about it together, and then ultimately they'll write that down. I've done this. Oh my gosh, you can do this with so many different things. You can do this with shoes, with neckties, with McDonald's toys. You can do this with all different types of pens and pencils. Uh, Sauce packets from restaurants. Y'all, like, the sky is the limit. The idea is you're forcing them to make an analogy, and they have to justify that. And the discussions are awesome. All right, I got to stop there. So the rest is up to you. It's going to be a choose your own adventure for the workshop. The workshop portion, if you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out and ask me if you need anything. All right, thank you so much for joining me, and have fun.